After the storm had passed, Michael Trey just didn't want to leave his apartment anymore. There was something about the booming thunder and the dire news reports, the red line across the bottom of every TV show warning residents to stay inside and away from windows, even if they were closed and shaded. Subway tunnels were flooded, as were the streets. The airports would be closed for the next 4 days, and the Hudson has risen up over the West Side Highway, causing millions of dollars in damage in lower Manhattan. The mayor interrupted TV Land's repeat of an old Married with Children episode to report that the National Guard had been called out. President Obama had taken a train to Manhattan to address New Yorkers everywhere, telling one and all that he had declared them a disaster. He wore a white dress shirt with thin green and blue pinstripes. He didn't wear a tie because he was getting down to business. That's what Michael thought. Even the president was afraid of the havoc that nature had wrought. It didn't matter that the sun was shining the next day or that the skies were blue and cloudless. The storm, Michael knew, was hiding behind the horizon. And there with it was a hothouse sun, crazed terrorist bombers, and women with HIV, hepatitis C, and thoughts of a brief marriage followed by a lifetime of support. In North Korea, they were planning a nuclear attack. And there was probably some immigrant on the first plane after the storm infected with a strain of Ebola virus that would show symptoms only after he had gotten past customs. Michael didn't go to work the next morning. The radio and TV said that most public transportation was moving normally. Traffic was congested, however. 3 sidewalks in Manhattan had collapsed from water damage. Just walking down the street, someone might get killed or paralyzed. Europe's economy had almost failed again, except that the Germans bailed out the Greek with money that neither of them had. China was going to take over the American economy and make Michael and everyone he knew into communist slaves, living in dormitories and eating boiled rice. But if no one could buy the goods, then China's economy might fail, and it would engage its 200 million man army to reclaim all the money we borrowed to pay for the health insurance of the undocumented, Spanish-speaking, job-stealing illegal immigrants. There were microbes in the water after the storm. Militant Muslims had used the cover of the downpour to plant explosives under churches and big businesses. They weren't afraid of the rain like Michael and other poor Americans who just wanted to work until retirement never came. The phone rang on the morning of the 3rd day that Michael had not gone into work for Prospect, Farr, Grant, and Heldhammer. Michael picked up the receiver, but did not speak. "Mike?" someone said. "Mike, is that you?" "Michael is not here," Michael heard himself say. Immediately, he felt warm and safe behind the subterfuge of those words. He wasn't at home, and therefore he couldn't be reached. Couldn't be touched, burned, infected, blown up, or experimented upon by sales scientists working in subterranean desert laboratories for the superstores. A lifetime of the nightly news and conspiracy theories woven into TV shows, movies, and even commercials, of the racist, sexist, classic schemes of big business and its political candidate shills, the private prisons, police, billionaires and millionaires, movie stars and pop stars and country stars and serial killers. All this came together in Michael's mind in his apartment 3 days after the disaster that finally he understood would never end. "Mike, it's Fenimore, Ron Fenimore. Mr. Russell is wondering where you are." "I'll leave Michael the message," Mike said, and then he cradled the phone. After hanging up, Michael had the urge to giggle, but suppressed it. He knew that if he showed any emotion, soon they'd say he'd gone crazy and take him away. "Yes," he said when the secretary answered the phone. "I'm calling for Mr. Trey. He's not coming in today because of inclement weather." It was raining, and so Michael felt justified. "Just a few showers, Fay Lesser, Thomas Grant's assistant. That's how the last storm started. What if he got there and it came down like that again? Who would feed his cat?" Michael didn't have a cat. He didn't have a fish or even a plant. If he had had a plant, it would have died because he hadn't put up the shade since the storm. Television spoke of conspiracies and disasters, both domestic and foreign, that were increasing in severity, like the storm that had raged over New York. There were mad cows and rampant use of hormones and antibiotics. The Y chromosome in men has shrunk to the point that soon men might cease to be men and would have to learn how to be women without wombs. There were prisons across the country that together released at least 100 convicted killers every week, and banks that created bad debt. Michael was never sure how they did this, and then sold the non-existent interest to pension plans that subsequently failed. Michael started taking notes. He had 5 folders that he bought for his financial records but were never used. He labeled these folders diseases, natural disasters, man-made disasters, financial disasters, and human threats. 5 folders were just right for the notes he needed to compile. He saw this as a sign that he was meant to stay in his 14th floor apartment and study the truth that so many people missed because they went to work and therefore, somehow inexplicably, betrayed themselves. He spent whole days looking up fires, floods, serial killers, and food additives on his cell phone IP. He ordered hundreds of cans of beans and tuna, concentrated orange juice, and powdered milk from grocery delivery services. He made the delivery men leave the food at the door and collected them only when he was sure that no one was lingering in the hall. He used his phone to pay his bills until his account went low. The super brought up his mail and left it at the threshold for him. He'd been fired, of course. His girlfriend, Melanie, told him that either he would meet her at the Starbucks on 42nd Street or she was breaking up with him. His mother called, but Michael fooled her by saying that Michael wasn't home. And he was getting somewhere with his research. At first, he thought that the problem was that there were too many people. But he gave up that theory when he realized that people working together would be benefited by great numbers. Finally, he understood that it wasn't the number of souls, but the plethora of ideas that bogged down the world. It was like the old-time Polish parliament, in which nothing could be decided as long as anyone held a contrary point of view. The problem with the world was a trick of consciousness. People believed in free will and independent thinking and were therefore dooming the world to the impossibility of choice. Yes, that was the problem. Together, all the people of the world, Muslims, Hindus, and Jews, Christian, atheists, and Buddhists, would have to give up disagreements if they wanted the human race to survive the storm of incongruent consciousness that was even worse than the weather that had brought New York to its knees. Michael felt that he was making progress. He was beginning, he was sure, to articulate the prime issue at the base of all the bad news the New York Times had to print. He was trying to imagine what kind of blog or article he could author when the eviction notice was shoved under his door. It had only been 6 weeks. 9. 11. Just 11 weeks. But he was rent stabilized. And the collusion of city government and greedy landlord made it possible for prompt eviction when there was a potential for rent that could soar. Working after midnight for days, Michael drilled 48 holes along sides, tops, and bottoms of his doors and similarly placed holes in the door jamb and along the floor. He used a handheld cordless drill to do this work, and it took him 77 hours and 29 minutes. Through these connective cavities, he looped twine wire hangers, 2 strands for each hose. This reinforcement, he figured, stood a chance of resisting a battering ram if it came to that. He also used melted wax to seal the cracks at the sides of the doors so that the police couldn't force him out with tear gas. His beard was filling in, and his hair had grown shaggy. He looked to himself like another man in the mirror, the man who answered the phone for the absent Michael. He filled the bathtub to the overflow drain in case the super turned off the water. On his iPhone, he read the newspaper, studied Middle East, Central America, and the Chinese, who he believed had gained control of capitalism without understanding its deteriorative quality. Finally, all those boring political science courses that he took when he thought he might want to be a lawyer had some use. He was well on his way to a breakthrough when the landline rang. He always answered the phone. because in a discussion with the man in the mirror, he inferred that if no one answered, they might use the excuse that there was some kind of emergency behind his coat hanger reinforced door. Hello? May I speak to Michael Trey, please? A pleasant man's voice asked. He's not here. Then to whom am I speaking? This was a new question, and it was very smart, very. This was not just some befuddled contrarian thinker, but one of those unofficial agents that pretended to protect freedom while in reality achieving the opposite end. My name is X, he replied. And suddenly, magically, Michael ceased to exist. X? What do you want? My name is Balkin, Bob Balkin, and I am an independent contractor working for the city to settle disputes. I don't have any disputes, Mr. Balkin, Bob. As a matter of fact, I might be one of the few people in the world who does not disagree. I don't understand, the independent contractor admitted. I have to go, Bob. Can you tell me something first, Mr. X? What's that, Bob? What do you want? The question threw X out of Michael's mind. The man that was left felt confused, overwhelmed. The question was like a blank check, a hint to the solution of a primary conundrum from an alien, superior life form. It had ecclesiastical echoes running down a corridor heretofore unexplored in Michael's mind. What do I want? Michael repeated the words, but changed the intonation. Yes, Balkin Bob said. I want, Michael said, I want people everywhere to stop for a minute and think about only the essential necessities of their lives. You know, air and water, food and friendship, shelter and laughing, disposal of waste and the continual need for all those things through all the days of their lives. Balkin Bob was quiet for half a minute. And so Michael, not X, continued. If everybody everywhere had those thoughts in their minds, then they would realize that it's not individuality or identity, but being human, being the same that makes us strong. That's what I've been thinking in here while the rain's been falling and the landlord was trying to evict me. But Michael hasn't paid the rent, Mr. X. I have to go, Bob, X said, and then Michael hung up. 8 days later, the electricity was turned off. The grocery delivery service had bought him 30 fat 9-inch wax candles, so he had light. It was all right to be in semi-darkness, to be without TV, radio, or internet. Michael had his 5 folders and the knowledge of a lifetime plus 4 years of college to filter through. 2 days after the electricity went off, it came back on. Michael wondered what bureaucratic and legal contortion had the man with his hand on the lever going back and forth with the power. Just after the light flickered back on, the phone rang. When it sounded, Michael realized that there had been no calls for the past 48 hours. Not his mother and not Melanie, who worried that her demands had brought him to this place. He always answered the phone, but rarely stayed on for more than a minute. The phone didn't depend on the power system. Maybe the phone company had cut it off for not paying his bill and then, at the behest of the city, had turned his service back on. Hello, X said. Mr. X? Bob? How are you? Things are becoming clearer all the time, X said. I just don't understand why you cut off the power and then turned it back on again. I didn't do it, he said. But you're working for the people that did, or at least their friends and allies. Do you feel that you are at war, Mr. X? I'm just an innocent bystander who has made the mistake of witnessing the crime. X was much more certain about things than Michael was. I recorded your statement about what you wanted. Someone in my office released the recording to the media. You have a lot of friends out here, Mr. X. If you look out your window, you will see them in the street. I'd like to, but there might be something there I don't want to see. And I don't want anyone seeing me. No one wants to hurt you, Bob said in a very reassuring voice. No one wants to kill children in Afghanistan either, but it happens every day. You haven't come out of your apartment since we got hit by Hurricane Laura. And here, I don't know anything about you. What do you want to know? Bob Balkin offered. You ask good questions, Bob. And? Do you think that we're equal to our technology? Maybe not. So why are you on my ass? That's all I'm saying. Let me ask you a question, Mr. X. What's that? Do you think that we're equal to our biology? Neither Michael nor X was ready for that question. It got down to the crux of what they'd been trying to figure out. If the human mind, Michael thought, was the subject of biological instinct, then there was no answer, no agreement, nor any exit from madness. Stroking his beard, Michael forgot about the phone call and wondered if his own body was an unconscious plot against the idea of humanity, humanness. Machines and techniques could be torn down and abandoned. But what about blood and bones, nerves and hormones? Was he himself an aberrant machine set upon an impossible mission amid the indifferent materials of existence? Was his resistance futile? While he was considering these questions, the phone went dead and the lights cut off. There came sounds of heavy footfalls in the hallway. Suddenly, there was a great thumping wallop against his fireproof, steel-reinforced hangar-loop fire door. The police battering ram hit the door 19 times by Michael's count. The lock and hangers, door jambs, and metal infrastructure helped. The pounding ceased, and the voices sounded up and down the outside hall. There were shouts and curses. One man suggested they break through the wall. Michael armed himself with a butcher knife and then put the cooking weapon down. I can't hurt anybody, he said to no one. That night, Michael slept on the living room floor in front of the door. His iPhone was dead and the lights were cut off, but under candlelight, he read Man's Fate by Andre Malraux. He felt for the characters in the novel, though for the most part he did not identify with them. Revolution, Michael thought, was both personal and shared, and everyone and everything had a part in it. His only affinity was with the feeling of doom and dread threaded throughout the book. He believed that soon he would be killed because he had decided to stop moving forward with the herd towards slow but certain slaughter. Mike! Hey, Mike! A voice hissed. Michael had fallen asleep. He believed that his name was part of a dream, but he didn't know why anyone calling out to him would be important. He tried to lift his right hand, but it wouldn't move. Mike! The voice became more plaintive. Suddenly afraid that people had secretly come in and bound him, Michael lurched up, jerking his right hand from whatever held it. His fingers were encased in wax. The candle had burned unevenly, and warm wax had pooled and dried around his hand. Michael laughed to himself, relieved that he was safe. He blew out the burning wick. Mike! The ventilation plate in the living room had a faint light glowing between its slats. Michael's first impulse was to cover that opening with plastic and masking tape, but he hesitated. He pulled a chair to the wall and got up on it so that he could stand face to face with the brass plate. Who's that? He asked. Mike? Yeah. It's Tommy Rhymes from the apartment next door. The tall guy with the mustache? No, the voice said. I'm the guy who goes bowling all the time. Michael remembered the squat, middle-aged man with the pot belly and the red bowling ball bag. You want to go run down some pins? He once asked Michael. What do you want, Mr. Rhymes? They got you all over the news, Mike. From Occupy Wall Street to the Wall Street Journal. They've been talking about you. You went viral on the internet now that the cops couldn't beat down your door. Fisk, the guy with the mustache on the other side of you, he videoed it and put it up on YouTube. You're a celebrity. Michael was peeling the wax from his fingers and wondering what notoriety would get him. Would it hold the hurricane back or keep the communists from conquering themselves with capitalism? Would he get Melanie to take him back? Mike? I had all but forgotten that Tommy Rhymes was there. What? The newly minted celebrity asked. Can you take off the ventilation plate? Why? I want to push through a power strip in this aquarium hose I got. That way you can have power again. And if they cut off your water, you can have that. Why? The rich guy from uptown put what you said to the city psychologist up on a billboard down the street. I like it. I mean, I think you might got something there. And even if you're wrong, I like it that you're sticking it to the landlord. By morning, Michael had light. And once he powered up his phone, he found that it was still working. There was an email from Melanie telling him that she had paid his phone bill. On his tiny phone screen, he could see newscasts covering 1,000 people in the streets outside the apartment building, protesting the police, the mayor, the landlord, and everyone that uses the law to keep people apart. I believe that Mr. Trey is trying to speak for all of us, a young black woman with braids that stuck out from her head like Spike said to an interviewer. I mean, here we are working hard and barely able to live. We eat junk food and watch junk TV, and our schools are being closed down because they're so bad. I mean, the police will frisk anybody except if they're rich or something, and we're fighting a war without a draft. Mr. Trey has just stopped. He is saying that he doesn't want to be a part of all this bleep and that we should all do the same. I am a conservative, a white man in a dark blue suit told the camera. I believe that we have to fight the war and bail out the banks. But I still wonder about what this guy says. I think he's crazy, but you can't deny that there's something wrong with the world we're living in. Both liberal and conservative press praised Michael. Called him a people's hero who was refusing to take one more step before the other side made changes. They bent his words, however. That's what Michael thought. They didn't understand that the whole idea was not to have a hero, but to discover a natural credo, to unite people and keep them from destroying themselves. We love Michael Trey, two beautiful young women shouted at one camera. The city or the landlord cut off his water. Tommy Rhymes turned it back on through the aquarium hose. The iPhone sounded. Melanie? Micah said after seeing the screen and answering. They've closed down the street in front of your building, she said. The police? No, the protesters. They want the city to leave you alone. One group is raising money for your rent, and 4 lawyers are working for injunctions against the landlord. Other tenants are making complaints against health and safety infraction. A journalist asked President Obama about you, but he refused to comment, and it's been all over the news. What has? Michael asked his ex. Obama not saying anything. Michael tried to remember why he had decided to stay in his apartment. It was a storm. He was just too afraid because of the threat the news media made out of the storm. He was afraid, not heroic. Michael, Melanie said. Mm-hmm. Max Strummer, who owns Opal Internet Services, wants you to do a daily podcast from your phone. He wants me to be the producer. Isn't that great? You could make enough money to pay your rent and lawyers. He said that if you couldn't think of anything to say, that we could send you text files that you could just read. I have to go, Mel, Michael said. What about Mr. Strummer? I'll call you later, Michael uttered. And then he touched the disconnect icon. After turning off the sound on his phone, Michael went to sit in his favorite chair. It was extra wide, with foam rubber cushions covered in white cotton brocade. There was a lamp that he plugged into a power strip hanging halfway down his wall from the ventilation grate hole. The light wasn't strong enough to illuminate the whole room, just the area around his chair. Reclining in the oasis of light, Michael tried to make sense of the storm and the street being closed down, and of the young women who loved a man that they'd never met, and Melanie, who had changed from an ex-girlfriend to maybe a producer. When no ideas came, he turned off the lamp, hoping that darkness would provide an answer. It didn't. He was trying to recapture the moment when everything had made sense, when he took action without second-guessing his motives. Feeling lost, he looked across the room and saw a blue luminescence. It was the phone trying to reach out to him. Half an hour later, he went to see who was calling. There had been a dozen calls. Most of the entries were unfamiliar, but one, instead of a number was a name that he knew. Hello? Mr. Balkin. Mr. X? No. This is Michael. Oh. Did you call me on city business? Michael asked. They wanted me to call you, but this is your nickel. I've been looking at the internet, Michael said. People all over the place want to protect me. They're offering money and legal support. One guy named Strummer wants to hire me and my ex to do a podcast for him. That's what you wanted, isn't it? No. I thought you said you wanted people to realize what they had in common. But between them, Michael said, not through me. I don't get you. Not like a natural disaster or some enemy, the young bearded man replied. I don't want to be the discounted meal at the fast food chain that you can buy in Anchorage or Dade County. I don't want to be anything except an idea. But you're a man. Thanks for that, Bob. For what? I needed to talk to somebody about these thoughts in my head. I couldn't get them out if I didn't have anybody to talk to. I know that you're working for them, but right now, they don't know what to do. And in that little window, you helped me. You really did. Help you what? I gotta go, Bob. Where can you go, Michael? You always ask the best questions. The next morning, Michael was standing in his kitchen eating from a can of pork and beans with a teaspoon when he noticed that the spigot had a slow drip. Michael wasn't sure if it was a dripping or his talk with the city psychologist that made up his mind. He tested the hot water and then called Melanie. She was surprised to hear from him and happy that he had decided to do his first podcast. He was careful, she was too, not to talk about love. At 4 p.m, Michael was ready. He had refused to allow Strummer to dictate what he said. He ignored the checklist of subjects his internet listeners might want to hear about. Michael had the bathtub draining when he started recording and had to close the bathroom door to keep out the noise. My name is Michael Trey, he said into the receiver, with no notes or even a notion of exactly what he'd say. I have lived in Manhattan for 7 years, and I was scared about about Hurricane Laura. So scared that I haven't left my house since it broke. Because I wouldn't go out, I lost my job, my girlfriend, and the landlord has been trying to evict me. I'm broke, and they keep turning my utilities on and off. I have hot water right now, and so I'm going to take my first real bath in weeks. My neighbor, Tommy Rhymes, pushed a power strip and a little hose through the ventilation duct, so I've been able to get by. I've seen videos of people down in the street supporting me. I like that, but it's misguided. What they should do, I believe, is lock themselves in their own houses and turn off the world outside. I don't know if this would be possible or if it would make any difference at all, but that's all I've got. What I am saying is that the president didn't talk about me because there's nothing to say. It is us that should be talking to him. It is us that need to get the red line out of the bottom of our screens because we're in it together as far as we go. But maybe that's impossible because we do things primarily as mammals, not men and women. That's really all I have to say. I know there are people out there that want a daily report from my musty apartment. But really, all they have to do is listen to this, what I am saying right now. Goodbye. Michael turned off his phone before running the hot bath in the deep iron tub. It was this tub that made him take the apartment in the first place. The hot water felt so good that he groaned when he first sat back. The stinging in his wrists subsided, and he wasn't afraid. He wasn't frightened, except when he concentrated on the hue of the water. He was exhilarated at first and then tired. in the way he used to be as a little boy getting in his bed. He wondered if anyone would ever make sense out of the fear herding that all the people and maybe all other creatures of the world lived under. He would have liked Melanie to say that she loved him, but only if he didn't have to ask.
That was wonderful. Thank you. It was great.
Thank you
so much. It's beautiful.
Thank you, Mr. Mosley.
Oh, well, bye.
Yes. That was just so beautiful. And I have to say, it was a treat for me to be witnessing you while you were hearing him and reading and performing your beautiful words. So that was also exciting to see moments where you were illuminated along with the words that I had read before. So I want to thank you for that, just to see kind of different moments within the text coming to life, and also seeing some of the wittiest parts coming to life in your laughter as well. So it just felt really special to be witness to that. And I'm really happy to be with you today.
Well, his reading was so great. There's a thing about reading, when you read for books, you have to do it like with a director, and no words can be wrong, and everything has to be pronounced, just the right way and stuff like that. And what it does, it takes out the feeling from a reading, which is one of the reasons I never do it. But to hear somebody like, read it from an emotional place, because every time somebody reads a novel, it becomes their novel, and it's somewhat different. And its interpretation, its understanding is somewhat different. And so it's great to listen. You don't usually get to listen to your readers, reading your novel. So, or short story in this case. It was really fun. I really liked it. It was a beautiful reading. Yeah.
I love that, because I felt that I could feel that, right? Even though oh, can you hear me? Can you hear me now?
I can now.
You can now. Wonderful. So yes. I felt that I could feel that, even though we're on either side of the country right now. There was something about watching that and seeing those words brought to life, and seeing that synergy between you two. So I'm just really excited. And also it was interesting to also be able to think about the themes of your book and how you so masterfully show the many dimensions of what it means to be a Black man, to be human, to be Black, and to be an awkward Black man, which I want to ask you more about, but then to also hear that come to life in new ways, and the words and through the lives of these characters as well. So one of the things I first want to ask you about is, because today, coming into this wonderful time we're having now, I had been looking so forward to it because I'd been feeling such a deep grief about the outcome of Breonna Taylor and not seeing justice around Breonna Taylor's murder, and just knowing that we're in the midst of a moment right now that has been going on for a long time, but also it doesn't seem that this sort of far-reaching effects of state violence and racial injustice that continue to rock our communities have a sign of diminishing anytime soon. And it felt really good to know that we were coming together tonight to celebrate the lives of everyday heroes. And what I kept thinking about when I thought about the awkward Black men who have been killed, people who'd been in my life, and people who I've read about are written hashtags for, simply for trying to live their lives. I was grateful for this moment to come together and ask you about how this reality we're in impacts your stories, and what it feels like to have your book out right now when we're grappling with so much.
Well, I think that's it's such an interesting question, because it always depends on who's hearing it. One of the characteristics of awkward Black men is they know really too much truth. you know, and this is not to try to say other people don't know these truths. I mean, you know, it's just the people I'm talking about in this book, they understand from the beginning every threat that's there. They know that, you know, when they go to the front door in the morning, well, I'm about to get out there. It's going to be trouble, and I know I'm going to have to deal with it. But okay, I'm going to deal with it. It's not like, oh boy, this is great. Maybe I'll get a raise. Maybe, you know, I'll get the day off. Maybe, you know, I'll fall in love. You know, all that stuff you think, but you also think, I got to be careful because I can get in trouble for anything that I do right. And so it's interesting, you know, it's like, you know, when Trump got elected, you know, and there was that thing, I forgot who did it. I mean, was it Chris Rock and Dave Chappelle? I don't know, but they did the routine on there. You know, the two black men did the routine. You know, where all these people are saying, "Well, this is the worst thing that's ever happened," and they go, "Really?" It says, "We never suspected this could ever happen," and they go, "Really, you didn't?" You know, it's that idea. This is that guy who's having a different experience over here, and who's incredibly sensitive. Which, you know, very often, black men aren't portrayed as being sensitive at all, caring at all, being worried at all, being thinking about, you know, Europe or China or Africa or anywhere. You know, they just, you know, well, they live in the ghetto. They think about the ghetto, and they're really tough and, you know, oversexed and things. And, you know, I just wanted to, at some point, write about, you know, a whole bunch of characters who aren't like that and who are looking at the world, that people are recognizing today, that many of us have felt, well, we've known at least half of this, you know, our whole lives, since before we were born.
And I've seen you say that there's only about 5 or 6 characterizations of black men that we usually see show up in the stories that we see in the larger popular conversation, and was really thinking about that when reading your book, and also kind of being surprised to read on Showdown in the Hudson, a Western, because that's not a characterization that I'm used to experiencing, but was really delighted by. And so I was wondering if you could speak a little about that too, about what it means to surface the complexities of our diversity and of the diversity of what it means to be a black man today.
Well, you know, it's interesting, you know, because there's a few things like there, you know, the black man can be, you know, a good buddy, or the black man could be, you know, a criminal, you know, a pimp, or a, you know, a numbers runner or something like that. You know, that's over on one side. And the other side, the black man could be, you know, homeless, or he could be a butler. You know, and I think, you know, think of the thing that Duke Ellington's father was a butler. You know, but in his mind and his heart and his dreams was Duke Ellington, you know, and you think, wow, how do those things go together? How do you have a butler who is not just a butler, but who's a human being with these large, you know, range of thoughts and abilities and aspirations, and not only having them, but not just for him, for someone else, for his son, or, you know, his daughter, or whoever. And, you know, that's a, you know, for me, to be able to talk about everything that everybody else always talks about in literature, but not exactly what they're talking about. I mean, my father was from Texas. Everybody in Texas thinks they're a cowboy. Everybody. It's a cowboy state. You know, I used my father's talking about, oh, you know, I'm a cowboy. I carry 2.6 guns, and, you know, and he literally did carry them, you know, I mean, not in a holster outside, but more hidden. But just to try to talk about a black cowboy, you know, it's like trying to talk about a woman doctor. You know, it's at a certain point, there were no women doctors, you know, and nobody expected, nobody wanted it, you know. Nobody wants there to be a black John Wayne, you know, at all.
It's so interesting you said that, because the thing that popped into my mind when you said that about your father in Texas is that Beyonce did a collaboration with the Dixie Chicks and the Daddy song, and it was, you know, all about actually having guns and what it would mean to, you know, have guns in the context of being in a Southern environment or protecting one's community, et cetera, but a completely different take than sort of what the right-wing argument is around that. And so I just had a connection in my mind in that moment too of what it means to kind of play on smashing these stereotypes in culture as well, and
right.
shining a light on a different way of life, on a different way of seeing these characterizations.
No, absolutely. I mean, and it's one of the things, because, one of the things about being cowboys, now to begin with, most of the early beginning cowboys were Black anyway. But, but even if you look at, like old Gary Cooper movies, like the Virginian, there was, the thing was, it was about being free. It was about freedom. It was about, I'm not going to have any fences. I'm not going to have any chains. Nothing is going to be holding me down, because, all I got is the prairie and these, cows, and that's how I'm living my life, and just to have that, it's not a dream that I don't want to be your slave or enslaved by you, to the larger world, but it's that I want freedom in exactly the same way that everybody wants it. As a matter of fact, I'm one of the people who created that language. And that's, there's so much just to think about. It's not this, try to say somebody's better or this or that. It's trying to say, if you don't have a history, if you stifle the history of people around you who have gone through the same experiences that you have, if you try to start silencing somebody else's experience, be there, like Hispanic or Asian, or, men or women, or whatever it is, if you try to silence them, you end up suffocating your own history. And so to be able to talk about these heroes rather than, trying to negate somebody else's history, what I'm trying to do is broaden the perception.
And part of that broadening of perception that I really like is that you are touching on these very complex and important social issues that we're experiencing. And even in the reading we just experienced, so many of the things felt relevant to today, but also felt relevant to many generations ago, and many of the social movements that are happening as well. And I was just struck by the fact that you also have happy endings in this book, that although we are kind of almost getting, and I'll speak for myself, I'll use I statements, we're kind of getting to this point where we are expecting tragedy, where we are constantly being pushed into a space of saying, oh, I'm unsurprised, it's always going to end this way, that this is sort of the lot that we're in because of all of these systemic ills. And I was really excited to see that there's triumph, there's joy. And I think that that's a really important part of our story, and a big important part of liberation and what we're going for. So I wanted to hear a bit about those narrative choices and to ask about, was that a conscious decision? How did you decide where joy would lie within the stories, across the many stories of the characters we met? But it was something that I'm really grateful for, because I think it's important just for me to have that in my mind, and us to have that in our minds too, that yes, there is pain, there is suffering, and there is joy. And there is triumph.
Exactly. It goes right along with it. I was watching, I love watching boxing. I was watching a little thing on Muhammad Ali, and the interview wasn't with him, it was with Martin Luther King. And they're saying, well, what do you think about that? And he said, well, I think he's absolutely right. This is a man who's standing up against the war. That's the right thing to do. And of course, they were on very different, sides, King and Ali, but there was, and that's a moment of like joy. It's a moment of Elon, that where you can see people who if you knowing the history, that, oh my God, they're agreeing with each other. And at one point he says, yeah, well, I discussed it with him. And you're like, oh wow, these people aren't in places where they won't even talk to each other. The same thing as the people who Black Lives Matter, and who follow the beliefs of Black Lives Matter. They're out in the street and they're marching and they're protesting and they're doing things. And I'm thinking, in my youth, when I experienced all this civil unrest, everybody on the dark side of that was killed, and there was only Black people on the dark side of it. It wasn't, all these other groups of people with them marching together. Like that alone is an extraordinary success. I mean, it's like people are actually saying, no, 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 this is wrong, and we're not going to take it, and it's not just the people who you're doing it to, it's everybody, because what you're doing is wrong. It's not just racist, it's wrong. And I think that there's really positive moments in that. I've talked to a lot of, young people like half my age, or less, and saying, oh, this is terrible. This is the worst that's ever happened. I said, there's a lot of good that's happening out there. Just the fact that it's happened. When you talk, people in government talking about defunding the police, that's not really a good term. I think that, it needs to have different language describing it. But still, if you understand what it means, it's like, wow, that's really cool. Whole cities are thinking maybe we could do this another way. So I think there are a lot of, if not happy endings, happy moments. Ecstatic moments in your life, that whether or not, you get defeated, whether or not you die, you've had great success.
Yeah, and that is, I think, part of what is an ecstatic part of this moment that I keep trying to remind myself of on the hard days, is that we are alive during a time where so much is being laid bare, that we are having to reimagine the very systems that we were told were foundational to everything. And what I love about the book and the way that you tell stories is also about reimagining how we tell the stories of who we are as humans, but also as Black people, and also Black men. I thought about this myself as someone who engages with Black men in my family and my life and many other people, and thinking, oh, I feel that there's another layer in which I am opening myself to it, and how I'm going to ask questions about their lives. And that was a great gift from the book. So I was wondering if you could speak a bit about this idea of reimagining, because that's something I picked up a lot too throughout the stories, even if the stories were different. If it was a story like The Black Woman in the Chinese Hat, for example, or thinking about another story like The Letter, that was something I kept thinking about in terms of reimagining what I think about as what Black storytelling is, but also how I connect it to the moment, because I just felt like time and space was also something that felt different, that, I'm thinking about history a lot, but also thinking about the future while connecting to the present experience of this moment through the words.
Yeah, I've been so interested, because I have like at least 2, maybe 3 speculative fiction stories among the 17 stories, and nobody talks about them, which I think they're being nice to me, because people get upset when things are speculative. Say, what do you mean? You don't know? That's not true. So, well, nothing I write is true, but yeah, for me, it's not thinking about reimagining, and not in that term. But I think that if you're reading the book, you might say, wow, this is a different way to look at it. You might, but I think that there are a lot of people who would say, yeah, that's what I think. I said, how can you call one person an African American and another person an Italian American? That doesn't make sense. You don't call people Euro Americans. They do call people Asian Americans, and that's wrong. I mean, if you're from Cambodia, and somebody else is from, Korea, and they're both the same thing, it's kind of weird. Same thing with Hispanic. I mean, when you start to talk about people's, who are defined by some kind of color that's not white, which is everybody in the world, and then begin to say, well, we'll just assign you a continent, and you belong there somewhere. That I think that's, we don't think that. I mean, sometimes we're forced to think it. Sometimes people make us think it. Sometimes people tell us, well, you have to talk like this, and I'm just saying, no, you don't have to do what they're saying. That's more it. You don't have to do what they're saying. Whatever rules Trump has or Biden has, okay, fine. I got to work with them, because, I'm working inside of this, this polity. But on the other hand, I can think what I want to think. I'm free in that way. And I think that's what these characters are saying. Most of them are saying, I have a way that I see the world, and I'm going to live the world according to the rules in my head, not the rules that you're enforcing on me. Mm. And sometimes I'm right about it, and sometimes I'm wrong about it. My cowboy, he realized he was wrong, and he's, trying to make up for what he did wrong, and other people, they're, well, a lot of people are wrong, a lot of people get into trouble, and they have to struggle, but we all struggle. And I think that the thing, I was talking to somebody today about writing, when I was in writing school, some of the best people who were writers stopped writing. Mm. And so they never became writers. And then these other people who weren't quite as good as those people who stopped, they've become writers. They write novels, they're published, they do different work, and I think that's another thing. When I was a kid, I was talking to my father. My father said, Walter, if you want to do as well as the white man, you got to go to work a half hour early, and then you have to stay a half an hour later. He said, now, if you want to do better than that man, you're going to have to come in an hour early and leave an hour later. And I was a kid, I said, Dad, that's not fair. And he goes, that's right. And that was the end of our conversation. You have to struggle, and you have to keep struggling. But in the end, you're going to have done something with that struggle,
Yeah, I smiled so bright when you said that, because I was thinking about having the same things said to me, as a child, and thinking it was inherently unfair, and saying, why do I have to be exceptional when this dude over here gets to be mediocre because he's a dude and he's white? And so, or, upper class, or whatever it is. But I think it's a really interesting thing too, that I love about this book too, that the idea is you're not defined by other people's impositions of who they think you should be. You get to determine that. And I wanted to ask you this too, but I work at the Feminist Press. That's kind of my place that I'm in terms of thinking about feminism a lot. But this idea of self-determination is so much a reason why I was drawn to Black feminism in the first place as a teen, and then really wanting that to be a big part of my life and an identity experience. And I'm wondering about what you think about that idea of self-determination and what that means for us. And some people, they refer to it as self-possession and self-determination, and it's distinct from selfishness, right? But I think that there's something there that I found in these characters around that refusal to be defined by other. That is.
Well, I think that, listen, I don't know. I mean, that's not a question that's easily answered, and so I don't think that. So I don't think I have a final answer, but I think there are moments in it that one understands that whatever determination, whatever freedom, whatever I'm trying for, I have to believe in that for you. If it's going to work. If I'm just thinking, well, then you do become selfish. Well, I'm just going to get as much as I can. I'm going to make it. I'm going to be on top, and you said, no, I'm going to work my way up, and if you're coming along, I'll help you, and you can help me. That's how life is. That doesn't work that well in capitalism. I understand, but I think that our belief in ourselves have to be our belief also on each other. And if we can do both of those things, we can feel them working together, then I think it's really the best. And it's difficult. And
that led me to one other theme that I wanted to dig into, because I also want to make sure we can get questions from all of these wonderful people who are with us tonight, which is the relationships that the characters have with themselves, but the relationships that men and women have. And that was an important part of this book to me, just around the fact that we don't talk about those complexities or the tension, I think, as much as we should, around what it means to be navigating humanness and all of the complexities that come with that, but also power dynamics and relationships, et cetera. So I was wondering if you could speak about what you were thinking about in terms of looking at relationships and also relationships as it relates to age, relationships as it relates to time and place.
Yeah, time is really, I think, one of the most interesting things because, you know, everybody wants to think that, you know, well, you start something here, you know, and then it goes on for 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 years, however, you know, long. And they say, these people have been married for 60 years. And, you know, I mean, that's fine. I mean, it's something that people have reached. But a lot of times we go in different directions. And the question becomes is when we go in different directions, what does that mean? And it might mean that, you know, we're together and happy. It might mean that we live in houses next door to each other and we help when we can. It might mean that one hates one and the other one, you know, is still happy. It might mean, as it does a lot in this culture, that women are more and more, you know, successful at, you know, at a system. And you find a guy who's like, well, you know, I don't want you to be more successful than me. You know, but that's the thing you can't think, right? That's the thing but that doesn't mean you don't feel jealous. That doesn't mean that you don't feel left behind. And you might be left behind. I mean, those are the complexities, you know, and the question, you know, becomes is, well, what are you trying to work out here? And it feels to me that the answer is, well, I'm trying to work out what I have in front of me. You know, like, how does this work? Well, should we try this? Should we do that? And not be afraid of anything, you know, and not in any way try to hold somebody back, which I think is the most difficult thing, you know, because, you know, love is, you know, is a tight fitting garment and we keep eating and getting bigger, you know, and so that causes problems.
And I like that, what you're saying, the idea of the power with instead of the power over, but also being able to acknowledge the discomfort of those complexities when they come up, right? And to be able to have compassion for that, or to kind of understand from where those things emerge. And you made me think about how I had taught freshman undergrads for a while a gender studies course, mostly Black and brown students, first generation students. And in the beginning of the class, I would ask who would call themselves a feminist, and it would be very few, and mostly none of the young men in the class would raise their hand. But at the end of the semester, all of them would. And it was because when we would talk about masculinity, I said that part of why I define myself as a feminist is because I want all humans to be able to live the full expression of what it means to be human. And I feel that the current gender dynamics limit that also for cis men. And so, and Black men and men who are men of color in many different ways around these societal impositions of how you have to experience and live masculinity. And so that was something I thought about a lot in these characters, and the value of how I wish I could have taught this book when I was teaching to show these are many different ways that Black men are experiencing life in many different forms. And many of those that you might recognize yourselves in, all of those are legitimate and have dignity and import. And I think it would have been really great for my students to have it. So I was wondering if you were thinking about expressions of masculinity or what readers would connect with in your writing of the book as well.
Well, you know, I wonder if I'm not sure, like I would say masculinity, like, I'm not sure if I would use that word, but I was talking about Black men who can't fit in the world, and that's in the world of capitalism, that's in the world of so-called race, that's in the world of men and women, that's in the world of, you know, fathers and sons and daughters and fathers, you know, and all of that. So in the end, I'm not trying to tell people what they should be thinking. I'm just showing them these characters and say, well, then you have to think, well, what would I do if that happened? How would I respond to this or to that? You know, and that becomes, you know, like in my story, Almost Alice, where the guy falls in love, you know, with this woman who tells him, you know, I'm not going to be here long. I got other things to do and other places to be. And he heard it, but it didn't matter. And he lost her. And then he's, you know, he goes on this, you know, decades long bender through the world. But he has enough basic ability that he probably got from his mother. He has a little relationship with her that in the end he's in the right place, and he's solved the conundrum in his head, you know. And you know, he's a guy, but and he's limited in certain ways by the notion of being a guy. Some of those are biological, some of them are, you know, social, cultural, linguistic, whatever. But in the end, you know, he's a person, he's a human being, and he has to deal with other people as a human being, you know. And you know, that's the thing that you know, all of those things together is what you have to think about, right? Yeah, you know, certain, as a guy I do this, but as a human being I do this, and you know, how do I work it? How do I work it out with you? You know what I'm saying? The whoever you're talking to. You know, and it's a very difficult question, partially because it's always changing, it's always shifting. You know, I was talking to a woman once, you know, who was she was from Nigeria, and she, you know, she was talking about marriage and her husband and stuff like that, and I said, well, you know, but the problem is that, you know, guys, who we are, how we are, guys are less successful in this culture. You know, as far as getting educated, as long, you know, you can inherit power, but it's hard to just create it. And I said, so like, take you, this one, she had a very important job in Hollywood, and you know, and her husband was still doing the same thing he was doing when she married him 20 years before. And in some ways they could no longer communicate, you know, and that's what I said. I said, well, you know, this happens. And she, and, you know, her answer was basically, well, that you just have to ignore all that and you have to treat it as it's always been. And I said, well, it hasn't always been one way. It's been changing. You want different conversations with people nowadays. And he probably wants the same conversations he's been having, you know? And how do you deal with that, you know? And if you don't know it, if you both don't know that as an absolute truth where you could start to deal with it, then, you know, whether you say together or not, it's not working.
I'm holding this right now, that we want different conversations, because that very much was a word and resonated very well with me. I think, you know, I see that in many of the different relationships, right, that I have in life around that too, of sometimes that being the issue, that some people want the conversation to remain the same and that it's shifting, and there's a lot of discomfort in that, and some need it to evolve. And how can we get to a place where we can hold those conversations together to have another conversation, is what you're getting me to think about.
The daughters have that same problem with their mothers. You know, you might have a mother who says, well, you know, what I do is I stay at home and I take care of the house and I do this and that. And the daughter is out being, you know, the head of the feminist press, you know, and there might be moments of great disagreement there, you know, but, and you have to accept that, but appreciate who you are anyway, because, you know, I mean, I'm not going to let capitalism define who's better than me. He said, well, you know, he has more money than you do, so he gets to the front of the line. I said, all right, fine, you know, but I don't think that's right, you know.
No, it's so interesting, because even, you know, I think about just the trajectory of how we define ourselves, you know, and I would say, oh, I think I've kind of, you know, would have seen myself as being sort of defiant in terms of what had been expected on a societal point of view. But I'm very much like my mother, who in her life was very ambitious and, you know, had many firsts in her career, right? And so that's a thing too, that we had to have the conversation for her to say, oh, just because I have this sort of very intense and far-reaching ambition, don't feel like you need to drive yourself on that same path. And that was something we have to look at around over-identifying with how, if someone is achieving so much excellence, how do you measure up to that, right? So I so appreciate you saying that, because it's something that I felt lucky to have someone who said, oh, wait, this is my path. This doesn't mean it has to be yours. But we also observe each other. And I think that's what I also love about your writing. And I've seen a lot of people say this about your writing, that you are very observant. And I'm imagining, you know, the people in your life, your loved ones probably could speak to that more, right? That I feel like the observant people in my life, I always want to ask them questions when I need answers, because you're probably noticing all the things all the time. But I saw that in your characters too, that you're observing all the things around them, and probably.
Yeah, writers, it's a good habit, observation. But I think, and just the fact that you and I are talking about this is kind of why I wrote the book. I love writing E.Z. Rawlins and all those other books. They're a lot of fun, and they can reveal a lot of things about what has been, what is, where we're going. But it's nice to write things where people just start to say, well, how does this fit? And how do I fit? How do I fit in this? You probably don't fit in an E.Z. Rawlins novel, right? I don't fit in an E.Z. Rawlins novel, but they're a lot of fun, and there are these black male heroes, and it's good. It's enjoyable. But this is has another goal in mind. Let's sit down and talk about things. Well, what would it be if this happened? Well, there really are people like this? Well, is this guy doing the right thing by not moving ahead in his life? Those kinds of questions.
And I love that. And I love that too, about the many people I could imagine recognizing themselves in this book, and recognizing themselves in the humanity of these complex Black men. So I want to thank you so much for your writing and your wisdom. And I also want to bring the circle of people who are with us today in with these questions, because we have some questions. So we have a question from Isa. I hope or is it Isa? I hope I'm pronouncing your name right, as someone whose name is often mispronounced. Walter, your men are often defined by their fear and their responses to it, which is still so rare and welcome in representations of men and Black men. What is the most frightening thing you've experienced in the process of your writing?
Oh my God, the most frightening thing I've experienced God. That's it's so interesting. I think I've, I had a very, very, very complex relationship with my parents. And my father, who loved me, so I'm not going to put it in my writing. I'm going to say something else. My father, who loved me passionately, but who was on his own from the age of 8. So he's going to compete with me no matter what. He couldn't help it, and he didn't even realize he was doing it. And I think that the thing that my father, did to me that I don't think he certainly didn't mean to, was to say, to be afraid when I was successful at things, because it would frighten him, and the fear would come out in some kind of angry way, one way or another. And I write about that a lot, but it's not something that I come across in my writing that upsets me. It's something that I experienced in my life, and I had to learn how to deal with. And and again, that's it's a really, it's a hard thing to say. It's not like, a lot of people say, well, my father abused me, my father was mean, and da da da. My father didn't do that. What he did was he made it very hard for me, and he made me afraid to do certain kinds of things. I had to realize those things and overcome them. And that's loving somebody, but it's not absolutely perfect to fit. And so you had to work with it. But I mean, that's one of many things that I'm afraid of and is wrong with me.
That's beautiful, because I think we're often in a position of loving somebody and it's not perfect and not fit. So we have a question from La Terrell, which is to ask you about your writing process and where your stories come from.
Well, those two things are connected. The writing process is to write every day. Every day. I write about 3 hours every morning. Ideally, it's 365 days a year. It probably works out being 360. And there's always a day, you were traveling or you were sick or something. But and now the reason that I write every day is that it's the relationship to Freud's practice of psychoanalysis. Now, I mean, psychoanalysis doesn't really work now because it had a very specific goal, and we don't really have those kind of neuroses anymore. But the idea of lying there every day, free associating, and then coming back the next day and doing it again. What happens between the first talk and the second is that your unconscious is working, and you don't even know it. It's just working. And then when you lie down again, all these new thoughts come out. So the idea of writing every day, like on one thing, let's say you're trying to write a novel, you're going to build up all of this information day after day. You'll sit down and you go, wow, now I know how to answer that problem. Now I know what he's going to say. Now I know where they're going. you know, and it's because working every day, you're tapping into a part of yourself that wants to come out. That's, you know, that's always trying to find a way out of your head. And you've actually organized a specific way to approach it. So yes, the thing is, I write every day, and the writing every day helps me get in touch with what I want to write.
So this next question, I think, is really exciting, just because I got to see, when we were prepping for this call, the beautiful locale that you are in right now. But the question is from Jill, which is, the locales in your stories, how important are they as the characters on their own?
You know, place is so important for any person, any, you know, young or old. You know, if you're a little kid, you know, and you've been away from home, the only thing you want to do is get back to your bed, because that's your bed, you know, in a room that you're in. Maybe it's your room, or maybe it's a room you share with somebody, but it's yours. It's what you know. And I think we carry that all through life. And so when I'm talking about a place, I find myself saying, I want to explain what the house looks like. I want to help explain what the air smells like. I want to explain, you know, how people are feeling. And, you know, the thing is, you know, as a writer, you have to do that as short as possible, because, you know, you don't want to just keep talking and talking and talking about architecture or something. But I think that people don't exist without a language. They don't exist without parents. They don't exist without a place, without gravity, without oxygen, and all of those, you know, without eating food every day. You know, so you have all of you try to put all those things together for the reader to say, wow, I understand that. I understand what they're feeling. I understand what they're saying. I understand why they're looking at it. Yeah, I get it. You know, rather than just, you know, just action, 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 sex, sex, sex. I mean, I like those things, but you can't really have a real person without the foundation of locale. And locale becomes many things, not just a place, but a language, a thought, an idea, a smell, whatever.
So the last question, I think, is the perfect last question, which is, what is next for you? What writing works in progress are you working on?
Well, you know, I finished this book, and I'm very happy about this book, The Awkward Black Man. It's fun to you know, be able to, you know, move things around a little bit. I have another Easy Rawlins novel coming out in January. It's called Blood Grove. It's Easy dealing with his memory of his experiences in World War II, plus working for somebody who's, you know, a vet of the Vietnam War. And that's a lot of fun. You know, race and being a soldier is kind of interesting. And, you know, then after that, you know, I have a couple of more mysteries I need to write. Right now, I'm trying to work with Sam Jackson, doing a mini series on my book, The Last Days of Ptolemy Gray, which deals a lot with, you know, dementia and great age. And also, I'm trying to do some work with some people about Louis Armstrong. And you know, the film work, you know, so, you know, and there are other things, but that's enough, right?
Oh, I'm very excited about that, and as a jazz lover, I'm especially excited to hear more about this work with Louis Armstrong. So it has been just such a pleasure, and just want to make sure that you know that this book has come to us at just the right, most important time. And thank you for gifting us with your wisdom and for your beautiful writing, as always.
And thank you. This has been really fun talk.
Thank
I
you.
like it. And thank you. You're still there. It's so late.
Yeah, the whole time. Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Walter and Jamia, that was such a great conversation. Leon, such a powerful reading. What a great event.
Yeah, it really was great. Yeah,
it was wonderful. Thank you, everybody who came to see us, and use that button right below the video to purchase Walter's book and dive into these stories. All right. Thanks, everyone.
You guys are
And
brilliant.
really, thanks to Center for Fiction for putting all this on. I mean, it wouldn't exist without you guys. So that's like so great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.